Russian authorities have reported a massive Ukrainian drone attack on the Engels airbase in Saratov Oblast, with Russia's defense ministry claiming to have downed 54 drones over the area. Windows were also blown out at a nearby hospital where one woman was injured, as well as two kindergartens and a school. Situated more than 465 miles from the Ukrainian border is a major strategic bomber base from which Russian aircrafts have launched long-range missile strikes through the three-year-old war. It has been attacked several times by Ukraine, most recently in January. The Ukrainian military general staff claimed responsibility for the attack in a social media post, saying the operation was a collaboration with the Security Service of Ukraine and the country's Special Operations Forces. Engels.
The Russians thought Engels air base was untouchable, but last night, Ukrainian drones, jets, and ground squads tore through radar gaps to hit the heart of Putin's bomber hub. You're about to see how electronic warfare blinded defenses, decoys drained missiles, and a synchronized strike force disabled the base in minutes. The question is not just how they pulled it off, it's what secret tactic turned the chaos into total control.
War isn't over until it's over. The agreements that have been reached between Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump, between Donald Trump and Vladimir facilities, that is on energy generation in Ukraine. These attacks were immediately halted by President Putin after his phone call. Zelensky are for only a partial ceasefire, which at this given moment is said to exclude attacks on oil and gas.
Stay with me, because the answer reshapes how modern war is fought. Before we move on, I'd like to ask you a small favor. If you appreciate this content, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Over 98% of you watch the videos without subscribing. It costs you nothing, but it makes a huge difference to us. So, did you click the subscribe button? Great, thank you so much. Now, back to the video.
But I assume they also are implementing this limitation on attacks. What we saw yesterday, and what you have just reported, is of course not covered by any agreements at present on a ceasefire. The news tickers this morning say nothing about it. And it's understandable the Russians are keen not to inflame public opinion by announcing what attacks the Ukrainians are making. This is the fog of war. Therefore, it is fair game for Ukraine to have a drone attack on the Engels air base. Let me also mention, though, that this has been reported in Western media. It is not generally announced in Russian news.
The Russians called Engels air base their fortress. To them, it was the iron wall in the sky, a launch ground for bombers that could cross borders, strike cities, and force whole regions into air raid drills. To Ukrainian planners, though, it looked less like a fortress and more like a giant exposed gear in Russia's war machine. Break that gear, and the whole cycle of strikes against civilian centers would slow, maybe even grind to a halt. That urgency, the need to disarm bombers before they could lift off, set the tone for the operation. The target wasn't symbolic, it was survival.
We are now living through the most destructive arms race in human history, because this time includes artificial intelligence. And if there are no real security, stopping Russia now is cheaper than wondering who will be the first to create a simple drone carrying a nuclear, except friends and weapons. And if the world can't respond even to old threats, and if there is no strong platform for international security, will there be any place left on Earth that's still safe for people?
Every missile that didn't fire from that base meant lives spared on the other side of the line. On paper, the defenses looked impenetrable. Rings of surface-to-air batteries layered outward like scales. Long-range systems overlapped mid-range launchers. Then came short-range interceptors waiting to catch whatever slipped through. Around that stood a net of radars sweeping the skies, bolstered by electronic surveillance arrays designed to sniff out even the smallest signal. Add to that a quick reaction alert posture and the illusion was complete. This outpost was untouchable. The challenge for Ukraine boiled down to this. How could fragile aircraft built on shoestring budgets hope to cross such a wall of steel and fire? Think of it as David closing distance on Goliath. Only this time, David's sling was a plastic drone with a handful of explosives and a circuit board instead of a stone. Goliath's armor wasn't just metal, it was waves of radio energy, sensor data, and layers of interception protocols. Every square mile was supposedly under vision, and every approach path mapped for threats. That's what made this move interesting. Ukraine wasn't looking to push straight through armor. They wanted to twist it, bend it, make it strike itself. Enter the electronic warfare vehicles. Rolled into position across the front line, parked in farm fields or abandoned depots, they sent out targeted beams that scrambled the ether. Entire frequency bands dissolved into noise. Operators behind the screens sat blind. Their radars still glowed, but the objects showing up were ghosts, phantoms appearing in dozens, sometimes hundreds. Missiles locked onto decoys and fired, wasting themselves on empty sky. In that rolling blackout, pockets of open air began to emerge. The unthinkable happened. The fortress began to misfire against shadows instead of threats. Radar techs watched their scopes flicker. Instead of one steady track, clouds of fake signatures swarmed, screens lit with contacts that vanished seconds later. When operators pushed the launch button, interceptors streaked upward into nothing. A multi-million-dollar rocket detonating in air thousands of meters high, chasing a target that did not exist. Meanwhile, real drones slipped through smaller corridors, skimming low terrain, invisible beneath the noisy storm overhead. The shift was surgical. The support jamming that was supposed to shield attacking craft was no longer a secondary piece of the plan, it became the blade itself. Decoys and interference struck first, softening and confusing, then the actual strike packages threaded through the gaps. That was the first glimpse of Ukraine's tactical doctrine evolving. No longer just deploying drones as cheap kamikazes, they turned the very act of deception into the decisive phase of the mission. By the time the real payload moved, Russia's shield had bent inward. The base was under attack, not from a frontal push, but from a collapse of perception itself. What use is a radar grid if every square on it lies? What good is a missile ring when it answers to phantom calls? For the first time, those open-air corridors existed. They had been carved not by brute force but by breaking trust between men and their machines. And inside those gaps, the route into one of Moscow's prized positions lay open. But here's the crucial detail. Destroying a base like Engels didn't rest on drones alone. Once the walls cracked, it took layered pressure, ground raids probing at sensor posts, cyber units flooding networks with false triggers, and aircraft riding the jagged seams left by the jamming. It wasn't just hardware against hardware, it was pressure synchronized across domains, each strike feeding the next. That was how the so-called fortress began to buckle. This was never just a drone raid. What unfolded was proof that flexible, layered tactics can bend and break even the hardest static base. When drones, cyber tools, and ground raids overlap, the shield fails from the inside, not from blunt force outside. That lesson matters because the next battlefield won't be about size, but speed, deception, and coordination. Subscribe and join a community that seeks to understand the realities of modern conflict. If Ukraine can blind, split, and dismantle what Russia claimed was unbreakable, then what other strongholds in modern war are nothing more than illusions of power?